All right. Today we have asked Lauren to share her experience trying to help with us.
All right, guys. Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm a heroin addict. She's recording me. It's weird. So I grew up in Saratoga, not far from here. I grew up in a relatively normal home, except for the fact that my father is an alcoholic. And I'm an only child, and I remember from a very young age knowing that my house was very dysfunctional. You know, my dad drank every single day. He was a high-functioning alcoholic. He went to work, but as soon as he got home, he would start drinking, and he was like a very isolated drinker. Him and my parents, my mom were still married, but he would go up into like a separate bedroom, and he would just stay up there, and he wouldn't come out, and he would just drink. And my mom kind of tried to pretend like it wasn't going on, and she worked a lot. So a lot of the times I would come home from school, and he would already be home, and he would already be drinking. So that was like my earliest childhood memories, were being afraid of going home, not really knowing what state my dad was going to be in, not wanting to have other friends over at a really young age, like 6 years old. I didn't want my friends to come over. And then finally, when I was 8, my mom divorced my father, and he moved out, and he disappeared out of my life until I was 16. And during those years, nobody knew where he was. I didn't know if he was alive, if he was dead, what state he was in. His parents didn't know, his brothers and sisters didn't know. He just basically disappeared. So, you know, my mom tried her absolute best to fill that void of me not having a father, and she definitely overcompensated. You know, like I was an only child, so I got basically whatever I wanted, and that kind of continued into my adolescence. Like, she was not strict at all. Like, I basically did whatever I wanted. You know, she worked, and she was on call a lot, so she had to go into the hospital, and I was just kind of home. And I remember being like 10 or 11, and I had a friend over, and she was like, you know, your mom's not home, and there's a liquor cabinet. And I drank one time with my older brother, and that was like the first time I drank. I think I was 10. We made like Dark and Stormies, which is just basically like a mixture of every single alcohol that my mom had in her liquor cabinet. And she came home from work. I think I was 11, and I was throwing up, and my friend was throwing up, and that was kind of the first time I drank. But I didn't become like a regular drinker at 11. I got really sick, and I was like, that was pretty lame. I don't really want to do that again. And I don't think I drank again until I was 13. But I knew that, and I've shared this before at this meeting, I've always known since I was really young that I felt like something was wrong with me. And I didn't know how to put it into words. But now as an adult looking back, I know that I had really bad anxiety as a little kid. You know, I would call it the pit in my stomach. I went to see a therapist like when I was 8, when my parents were going through the divorce. And, you know, I remember trying to describe to her the way that I felt. And I would say I have this feeling in my stomach all the time, and I never feel okay. And I always feel like something bad is going to happen. And I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even know that the word anxiety existed. I was just a little kid. But I remember always feeling different. And I would try to talk to like my other friends at that age about the way I was feeling. And they were like, I have no idea what you're talking about. They didn't feel the same as me. And I instantly felt like I was different, and I was alone. And I just had like really dark way of thinking as a little kid, you know, like I just didn't feel like I was really meant to be here, or like I had a purpose. And I remember I would just overthink every situation. And I always felt just like separate, different, and alone from probably the age of like 6 on, you know. And I remember the first time I drank, for that brief period of time, like I didn't have that feeling anymore. Like that feeling in the pit of my stomach, those racing thoughts in my head, they went away. And even though I didn't drink again for a few years, I kind of like in the back of my head was like, okay, well, there's something that I can do to get those feelings to go away. And then when I got into like 7th grade, I started drinking on a regular basis. And I started doing coke at like 14, smoking weed. And I mean, I was using coke like at school during lunch. We'd go out to my car and like blow lines at like 14. And then when I got older and I met other people, they were like, that's not normal. Like you were doing that at 14. And I just thought because I grew up in a town where that was acceptable, like a lot of my friends parents had a lot of money and they would go out of town and they had older brothers and sisters that would buy us alcohol and drugs, that it was just like a normal thing to be doing coke, like instead of going to gym class. And I didn't realize that that's not normal behavior, because I always gravitated towards people that wanted to party the way that I did. And I could always sniff them out. I could always find them no matter where I went. And, I partied really hard through high school, but I still did well, like with grades and sports and everything. And I got a scholarship to go to college in Vermont, a partial scholarship to play lacrosse, and I went. And I got kicked off the team within like 2 months, and I couldn't afford to go to school there anymore. And I got kicked off the team because I tested positive for cocaine, because I was doing coke and then going and trying to play a game at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it just wasn't working out. And I wasn't even upset. I didn't even care, because in my head I was like, okay, I can transfer to a cheaper school now, and I can party all the time and not have to worry about playing sports or grades or anything. And that's what I did. So when I was 19, I transferred out to Oregon. I went as far away as I possibly could from home, while still staying in the U.S. And I didn't know anybody out there. I had never been there. It was just like I saw like a documentary about heroin addiction in Oregon, and I was like, I want to live there. And that's what I did. I moved out there, and I started school, and within 2 weeks of living there, I started doing opiates. It was like, it's so weird. It's so, like, I look back on myself now. I was fascinated with heroin before I even tried it, and before I even knew anybody else that tried it. I remember watching movies like Requiem for a Dream as like a 16-year-old and being like, I want to try that. I think that would be a good life experience. And I did try it, and it was not a good life experience. But I got out there, and I started school, and I met a bunch of friends, and I was having a really good time. And I met a guy, and he was selling Oxy. I had done opiates like a few times, very recreationally, like hydros, like somebody got their wisdom teeth out, and we would do a few, and I liked it. I didn't really see what the big deal was with it, but when I went out there and I met him, and he introduced me to like harder opiates like Oxy, that's when I fell in love. Like, I remember the first time I did it, I blew a line, and I was just like I was in love. I was in heaven. Like, all of my worries, all of my anxieties, all of my doubts, all of my fears just like rolled off, and I didn't have to think about anything. And right away, it became an everyday thing very quickly. And like, I was so naive to opiates. Like, I didn't know anything about withdrawals. I didn't know anything about how you had to get them, or like what it led to, or that heroin and Oxy were basically the same thing. Like, I didn't know any of that stuff. I just knew that I liked it, and at that point, I wasn't paying for it. I wasn't having to go get it. Like, I would just hang out with him, and I would have it. And that's kind of like a pattern for me in my story. I always had a guy that like took care of my drug needs, and they'd be my boyfriend, so like it wasn't a big deal. But that was definitely a pattern for me throughout my addiction. So I was dating him, and he was really into it way more than I knew. And he had like a huge illegal at that time like grow operation in Humboldt. So he was making like a ton of money. He was harvesting his crops, and then he would buy like a shit ton of Opanas and Oxy, and I was just all set. And I was like living in this fantasy world. Like, I was in school, like I got to go on trips with him. I was high all the time, and then his whole like operation got shut down, and he didn't have that flow of income anymore. So he started stealing his father, who's a doctor, script pads. And then I started filling those too. And we did that, and we were doing large quantities, like writing ourselves out scripts for very large quantities of OxyContin and benzos. And he ended up getting caught and going to prison for a long time. And when that happened, all of a sudden, here I am, deep into my opiate addiction, and I no longer have my source of opiates. and I went through withdrawal I had gone through like very minor withdrawal, like one time for like 6 hours, and and then he came through and like brought me some shit. But this time it was like I was sick and I had no idea what was even happening. Like that's how naive I was to the whole thing. I had never had to find it, or I never had to do anything. Like I just went with him and I was high, and that's all. And so when he went away, it was a big wake up call for me. So here I am, I'm out 3,000 miles away from my family. I'm in school. I wasn't working. I didn't have to when we were dating. And all of a sudden I'm in like the worst withdrawals. And I was just like, how do I stay high? Like, where do I go to get these pills? Like, I didn't know anything. I didn't know how, I didn't have a connect. I didn't have anybody. So I knew this girl through school, and she was like, all right, this is what you got to do. So go to 82nd Street, put on some hoop earrings, and just walk around and ask dudes if they know where to get H. I was like, what's H? I didn't even know that like heroin and oxy were the same thing. Like I didn't know that you could do one or the other and it was the same effect. So I took her advice and I ended up finding a connect really quickly. And the next thing I was smoking black tar heroin. And it's pretty, like I feel like a lot of people have this story. Like you say, like, I would never do heroin. I would never shoot up. I would never steal. All the things that I said I would never do, I started doing very quickly. So yes, heroin's way less expensive than like an 80 milligram oxy, but my tolerance went up really fast, and I was smoking it every day. And I was noticing that like I wasn't getting as high at all, and I was going into withdrawals a lot quicker. And it was also hard for me to support my habit because I was a college student who was still trying to make that work, and I had like started waitressing, and it just like wasn't working out at all. So what I started doing, which was really stupid of me, I started like middlemaning for people. So like I would drive people to like go re-up, and I would do all that kind of stuff, or I would drive my drug dealer around who lost his license. And that was how I was supporting my habit for a long time. And meanwhile, I'm 3,000 miles away from my family, and they don't really know the extent of what's going on. Like my mom knew that I was partying a lot. She knew that I was getting thinner and thinner every time she would see me. She knew that I was calling more often for money, but she never, like in a million years, would have guessed that she sent her daughter off to college and she was now a heroin addict. She thought I had an eating disorder. I remember when I came home for some holiday, she sat me down and she was like, we can get you help for this, this eating disorder that you have. And I was just like, oh yeah, eating disorder. Like I went with that because that was way less worse than like having a heroin addiction. So I kind of went with that, and that's what my family thought was wrong with me because I was so skinny and so strung out. And they didn't really see me very often. It was like once a year, maybe twice a year. So it was kind of perfect for me because my mom was enabling me. She was sending me money all the time because she was worried about me. I was far away, so she didn't want me to go without things. I would use the fact that I was a student all the time to guilt trip her into sending me more money. And I just, I'd always been kind of a manipulative person, even from a young age, and I was just really good at it. I could get my family members and friends to feel bad for me and give me things, mainly money that I wanted. And I didn't really care. I didn't have a lot of guilt or shame back then because I was high all the time. And it kind of went on like that for a while. Like I was just using more and more. I started smoking crack randomly. I had a really, really bad benzo addiction through this whole thing. So I went to a holistic doctor out in Oregon to try to get off of opiates. And she ended up prescribing me 2 bars of Xanax every day. And that was her solution to get me off of opiates. And so then on top of my already really large opiate habit, I also became really addicted to Xanax. And that actually took me down further than heroin, to be totally honest with you, because the withdrawals for that were so much worse that I would literally do anything not to go through it. So I had developed, by this time I was like 21, 22. I had developed a really bad heroin addiction. I was still smoking at this point. Still somehow clinging to like this idea that I was going to graduate college. I think I took economics 3 times. And by the 3rd time, I was just copying off this little Asian guy that sat next to me. But like I ended up passing. Just barely. Like I just barely made it through. And I had switched my major like 4 times. And I was just trying so hard to cling on to this like normal life. Because I thought if everybody thought I was okay and I looked okay, that I was okay. And that was really important to me my whole life, like appearances, like as long as I looked good from the outside, it didn't really matter that I was like falling apart on the inside. And I had a boyfriend through this whole time who was not an addict, and I somehow managed to hide this from him, kind of. I mean, now talking to him, he's like, I weren't hiding anything, but he didn't know the extent of it. And so what I did was I started shooting up one day. I was really, really high on benzos, and I was hanging out with my dealer and his girlfriend, and they were always shooting it, and I was always driving them around, and they just seemed like they got so much more fucked up than me with me just smoking it. So I asked her if she would shoot me up, and she at first said no, but then I was like, I'll give you some of mine, like, to do it, and she was like, okay. And I remember when the first time it happened, I never thought that I would do that, but in the back of my mind, like I always kind of secretly wanted to. And when I did it, that is really when things went downhill extremely fast for me. I started doing it I never ever did it any other way after that, never once. And I became like I look back on the person that I was once I started shooting heroin, and I became somebody that I didn't even know, like within a month after that. Like I literally lived to get high after that. I had no cares for who I hurt. Like I didn't care how I was getting money anymore. I started stealing all the time. Like I started shoplifting every single day. I got kicked out of where I was living. I broke up with my boyfriend. I started dating this heroin dealer. Like I just went down so fast. And I did that for like a year. And I was living with him we lived in a van behind somebody's house for a little while. And then we got an apartment, but it wasn't really an apartment. It was just like a room. And back then, like nobody really said the term trap house, but it kind of was. And I did that. And then all of a sudden one day, my mom came out to Portland. She didn't tell me she was coming. And that was when I started going to rehab. So she put me into a rehab. I got out 28 days later, and I was like, I'm good. I'm cured. I'm going to move to South America, and everything's going to be great. So that's what I did. I graduated college by going and studying abroad for a while. I was there for like a year, a little over a year. And when I was in South America, I did not do any heroin because I could not find it, but I did cocaine every single day. I drank every single day, and I would tell people that I was sober because I wasn't doing heroin. And I had a lot of fun from what I remember. I see pictures of that year, and I don't remember much because they also had a lot of benzos and they were over the counter. So I was doing that and not working on myself at all, and my poor family is like funding this trip, thinking that I'm doing so well, and they're just happy that I'm out of Portland and I'm away from those people, and I come home and I'm just like a disaster. I just like literally all I thought about the entire year of being there was the next time I was going to shoot heroin. The entire time. Even though I was doing amazing things and seeing beautiful places and meeting like awesome people, that's all I wanted to do. I could not wait to get back to the US so I could get dope. And I went right back to Portland. And the first thing I did when I landed was I started using again. And it kind of went on like that for another year or so. And then I decided that I was going to move to New York City because, there's like no heroin there. And I moved to New York City. And this is like where my story kind of takes a turn for the worst. So I moved there, and of course I met a guy right away who was just as bad as I was. And we moved in together, and we started using every single day. And when I was using in Portland, it wasn't like using without regard for my life. You know, like I didn't want to die. Like I always was careful about how much I was using. But when I got to New York City, it was like, if I heard that somebody like OD'd on something, like then I tried to get that stuff because it must be really good. Like I did not care anymore whether or not I lived or died. Like I kind of gave up and just kind of thought like, this is probably how I'm going to die. Like at that point, I think I had been to rehab twice. I had gone one more time in between that period. And, you know, like people would talk about meetings and they would talk about the 12 steps there. And I just didn't really want any part of it, you know, and I look back on my frame of mind then, and it's like I wasn't ready to stop at all. Like I was still completely in love with heroin, and I was kind of willing to do whatever I needed to do to continue that relationship with it. And through this whole thing, my family, mainly my mom, the rest of my family had kind of given up on me. You know, she didn't really give up on me, and she definitely enabled me, and I can see that now. But like, she would always say like, I'm not going to give up on you, and you know, you're still alive, so there's still hope. And I was living in the city with my boyfriend, and we were living in a closet. We had like a mattress on a floor, and we were shooting dope all day, every day, and smoking crack. I was like maybe 100 pounds. My hair was falling out. He was stealing a lot, and he was stealing from dealers, and we were just getting really desperate because we didn't have any source of income. Like his family wasn't talking to him. My mom wasn't giving me my money anymore. She would talk to me, but like she was like at the end of her rope. And we were really desperate for money, so we decided to drive up here, and I knew my mom was out of town. And we broke into their house, and I stole thousands of dollars worth of stuff from my stepdad and pawned it all. And I had been stealing from him. Like whenever I would go home, I would steal stuff from him and pawn it. And that's a big part of my story. Like I was a huge, huge thief when I was using. I would steal from anybody that loved me mainly. You know, I would take whatever I wanted from them in order to stay high. And after that, I remember she called me. And she said, "This is the last time you're going to talk to me. I'm shutting off your cell phone. I'm done." And for some reason, hearing her say that was like it hit me. Like it hit me really hard because like I always had that safety net, which was her, you know, like I always felt like I wasn't alone, like in like the crazy, lonely, painful nightmare that addiction is, because like I knew that she was still there for me if I needed her, but she wasn't going to be there anymore. And I remember that scared me a lot because like my mom and I had been together through everything. Like she was the only one there for me in my childhood when my dad was gone. And like I really valued our relationship despite everything that I had put her through. And when she said that to me, it kind of woke me up, not right away, but like we were homeless by that point, and I was sick all the time. Like I was literally sick more than I was well. And I was just getting like really desperate and really just like sick and tired of feeling that way. And I finally called her. It was like November 15th, I think, of 2014. And I called her and I said, "I'm ready to go into treatment." And, you know, I think by that point I had already been 5 times. And so she was kind of like, like, right, you're ready to go spend some more of my money. And she was like, "No, I'm not going to do it this time. Like, you're going to have to set this one up yourself." So I ended up going to a free rehab called Long Island Teen Challenge, and it's Christian based. Holy shit. So it's like a Christian boot camp, basically, where you just like praise the Lord all day long. And I had no real like I mean, like I grew up kind of going to church because my Italian grandma like got really mad at my mom if we didn't go on Easter and Christmas, but that was it. That was the extent of my whole religion thing. So like when I got to Teen Challenge, I was the most dope sick I'd ever been in my life, and they give you nothing, and you get like a shitty little bunk bed with all these like hood rat girls around yelling at me to get up and do my chores, and I was like, oh my God, like this is hell. Like I'm here, this is hell. And I got through that. I was there for 2 months, and then not even a month, and then I relapsed as soon as I got out. And then I went to Minnesota. And this is where I got sober. So I went into treatment. It was my 7th time. I was so exhausted. I crashed my aunt's car when I was high on benzos the day I was supposed to go to treatment because I was running away from her. But anyway, I went into treatment and I surrendered. Like, I didn't even know what that word meant, but like I got there and I was so physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted, mentally, spiritually, I was just completely defeated. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to die. Like, I feel like I'm already dead. Like, whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do it. And this rehab was completely 12-step based. The entire thing was about 12-step programs. It was different than anywhere I had been. And they basically gave me a guide to how to work this program or any fellowship. And that's what it was all about. And I got a sponsor. I got a home group. I went into sober living. And I did it all,